Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 12 of Legends of Tomorrow called Last Refuge. And boy, was this a really packed episode. I think this is easily one of my favorite episodes of the series so far. So let's just kind of get right into things. The idea of the Time Masters having sending somebody out to kind of kill the characters' younger selves. I mean, again, this is very in keeping with stuff we've seen in the comics. It's already been pointed out that by Rip Hunter, and we're kind of reminded at this episode that the reason he calls himself Rip Hunter, which is an alias, is so that nobody can go and kill his younger self. And we have seen exactly what happens here, where somebody kills a past version of somebody's self, and they're erased from history. The heroic incarnation of Kronos, Gabriel Walker, was destroyed from continuity in such a fashion by, actually, I think it might have been Per Degaton and his evil time travelers. So there's that. Anyway, let's just kind of get right into things with everybody. I do want to start by talking about the villain this episode, the Pilgrim. Now, I don't think this is meant to be any kind of an established character from the comics. I have heard a few people mentioning there was a Wildstorm character called Pilgrim. Now, the Wildstorm universe, long story short, was its own kind of universe, published by Image Comics. Uh, Basically, DC bought the Wildstorm company and, in their true DC fashion, did some crazy cosmic stuff which incorporated those characters into the DC universe proper. And since then, notable Wildstorm characters like Sarah Rainmaker and Caitlin Fairchild, Voodoo, Grifter, Zealot have all come to play, notable roles in the DC universe, which is great. I was a huge Wildstorm fan back in the day. I still have an enormous fondness for those characters, despite the Wildstorm universe um, certainly having its flaws. But it was a fun little playground, and was a place where a lot of talented people in the modern industry kind of really got their start. Warren Ellis, for example, um, really did a lot of stuff that really made people stand up and take notice back when Wildstorm was still its own thing. And of course, that helped kind of just boost him along, as well as his own independent stuff. Well, his own, stuff that was belonged to him as ideas like Transmetropolitan, which is a fantastic book. But anyway, getting back into this, as I said, there was a character called Traveler from that Wildstorm universe. I'm sorry, Pilgrim. If I'm remembering the character correctly, she was a time traveler, and she even fought Gen 13 at one point. Um, the thing is, though, there was another time traveler who was associated with her who was male, and I can't remember which one of them was called Pilgrim and which one of them was called Traveler. I mean, these are really obscure characters. I think I've only ever read two comics with the one character that I'm thinking of. So, yeah, I have a feeling that this is probably just a coincidence that they have a female with this name, and it's not meant to be this Wildstorm character. But nonetheless, Pilgrim is a formidable foe. I mean, she's basically a one-shot character. I mean, she's dead by the end of this episode, but she does present a formidable challenge. Um, the big fight at the end, and her like just using that crazy slow down time power on everybody. I mean, man, they really pulled out the stops on the special effects and the direction this episode, and it worked so well. I mean, they're obviously taking some pages from Terminator here, and I mean they directly reference Terminator in this movie, in this episode. So, but that's okay. You know, Traveler was, as I said, a very formidable character. The looked like the heroes had found a way to deal with her, and she sort of fights dirty by kidnapping their loved ones. She, again, proves to be a serious challenge, and the way they take her down was completely unexpected, but made total sense, which is what I love. And especially the irony of it all. I mean, she was going out there trying to kill their younger selves, and ultimately she dies because of Kid Rip Hunter. So, very cool. I liked that. If we're going to talk about the team, I guess we might as well just start with Rip Hunter. Now, in this episode, he mentions that his real name is Michael. Now, this is interesting because in the comics, Michael is the real name of Rip's father, who is Michael John Carter, aka Booster Gold. I'm not sure if they've ever directly said what Rip's real given name is, only that he's Booster Gold's son and thus is part of the Carter family. It is entirely possible that he could just be Michael Carter II or Michael Carter Jr. Now, of course, we've come to the whole situation before of, hey, in the comics, Rip Hunter is not English, and he certainly wasn't, some street kid who used to be steal for a living, as far as I know. So I have a feeling they've probably just sort of taken some liberties with his backstory here, and they're like, hey, Arthur Darvill has a really cool English accent. Why would we not want him to use that? I mean, it's always never been very subtle that they're playing up the whole Doctor Who connection with Arthur Darvill, and okay, I'm cool with that. The idea of Rip Hunter as sort of DC's own personal Doctor Who is kind of cool. Not exactly the most equivalent of basis, but Rip's at times ruthless nature is in keeping with some of the incarnations of the Doctor, and man, why not? Really? I mean, plenty of people who enjoy out there enjoy both DC Comics and Doctor Who, and why the hell shouldn't they? I mean, I'm one of those people. This, yeah. And just to kind of give you a little insight into me as a person, there is a picture of me in my old high school yearbook wearing a Doctor Who t-shirt. Yeah, I was that big of a geek in high school. I would publicly wear Doctor Who t-shirts. And this, remember, I'm old. I'm older than I look. So, yeah, you didn't walk around wearing Doctor Who t-shirts in public in the 90s. Let's put it that way. Anywho, let's get it back into it. So I do like how Snart is kind of like, hey man, we don't know anything about you. And Rip is like, dude, I've explained to you. Snart's but, yeah, but we still don't know anything about you. It's just like, geez, Snart, stop being a dick. Rip has explained his reasonings just fine. And your counter arguments about, trust. Need I remind you, Mr. Snart, that you are a murderer? Okay, remember the first episode where we meet Captain Cold on The Flash? He kills one of his own gang, which is massively in contrast to his Cold's whole thing about like, hey, somebody messes with my crew. Never mind the fact that he murdered Deathbolt because he owed him money. So it's always kind of fun when Snart feels that he somehow has the moral high ground when he totally does not. And it was pretty hilarious to see, baby Snart, especially with like when Kendra and Sarah start cooing over how cute he is as a baby, and Snart's just like, yes, I was an adorable infant. Now, what's interesting is that this episode confirms that Leonard Snart was born in 1972, which in the real world is the same year that Wentworth Miller was born. So Captain Cold and Wentworth Miller are the same age, which okay, nice bit of thinking. I had previously wondered, hey, how old is Captain Cold? And here he's a not exactly a spring chicken, but he's a guy who definitely looks younger than he actually is. Not unlike myself. Sorry, I was just talking with one of my coworkers the other day, and I did tell her how old I was, and she was completely shocked. Again, how old am I? I'm not going to tell you. But suffice to say, I was a younger person in the 90s, and I look younger than I am. So, fortunate in that regard. Although I have unfortunately inherited Dad's receding hairline, but that's been going on since I was in college. Some days I can't believe I actually used to have bangs down to here. But anyway, we need to get moving on to our other characters. Nothing really particular to say about Stein this episode, but seeing him come in there and comfort Jax when Jax had been crying, I mean, that was cool. I mean, it is I mean, it certainly wasn't in any way subtle, but again, comics are never been big on subtlety. I mean, it's very clear. While that, Stein really is basically probably the closest thing that Jax has ever had to a father. And these are two wildly contradictory people. Stein's an old white guy with a college education. Jax is a young black dude who never got to go to college. But over the time, we've seen these two people come together, become friends, have kind of a partnership. And Stein, just given his nature as a professor, a teacher, an older man, has stepped into that role of a bit of a mentor, a bit of a father figure. And you can see here that Jax does value that, and that Stein does put a lot of that bit of their relationship is very important to him. Also hilarious that they were using a little bit of camera editing to hide the fact that they totally did not have the actual actress that played Stein's wife here in this episode. Let's briefly talk about what's going on with Kendra and Ray in this relationship and their relationship and all of this. I do like that they point out, like, yeah, the Pilgrim wouldn't bother to kill Kendra because there's no point. She'd just reincarnate. And of course, the show saves a little bit of money by just having Brandon Ruth play Ray Palmer from a couple of years back. um, and what's really interesting is that they specifically say that one of the people that they've taken hostage is Ray's dead fiance, the one who got murdered when Deathstroke and his crew went on this rampage in Central City. But it's only ever vaguely mentioned, very briefly, that she's one of those people that's a hostage. And it's just like, really? All this stuff going on, and Ray doesn't even want to like look at her, through a security camera or something. And then by the end of this episode, after some serious back and forth, which was good stuff, it is true that you don't want to agree to marry somebody when they think they might be lying on their deathbed. But on the other hand, if you got something real, there's never going to be a perfect moment. Perfect moments just don't exist in life. Sometimes you have to kind of just carpe diem and seize the day. But still, it's just sort of like, man, that kind of feels like something a really important character beat that should have been addressed in some way, and they just zip by it, which really felt disingenuous. But again, it's a 1 hour show, so. Um, Also, kind of fun to see Kendra and Sarah sort of just, you know, having some girl talk about the situation. I love how Sarah's like, "Wait, you're taking advice from me?" One thing about Sarah though, it looks like they really are kind of like trying to sort of put away like, okay, she used to be with dudes, and really just kind of like, okay, she seems to be exclusive to women these days. So I kind of have some mixed feelings about that, but okay, you know, Sarah is bisexual, Sarah's a lesbian, whichever. Okay, I mean, she's a really awesome character. I absolutely love Sarah. Katie Lotz is fantastic. I love her so much. I'm really disappointed. I actually had a chance to go and see her at a convention not too far from where I lived, but at the time I was seriously strapped for cash. And I was like, I just can't afford it. Anyway, it was definitely interesting to go and see Sarah's younger self. Nice to have Paul Blackthorne on the show, and just so weird to see him with that hair. Um, the only thing that really kind of gets me about that scene is this ultimately kind of factors into the whole bit where last episode, was it Snart or somebody or whatever asked Rip if he had one of those Men in Black memory erasing gadgets. Well, here we find out that they do have amnesia pills, but this doesn't get around the fact that the Traveler attacked a police station, beat the living hell out of God only knows how many cops in a police station, which would doubtlessly be filled with security cameras. So, yeah. There's going to be loads of evidence that this happened, and the show just swoops on by. And that's one of the things about TV is that security cameras only exist when it's convenient for them to exist. Otherwise, And man, can you imagine if this was a British show, which would probably be set in London, which is just infested with security cameras? I think it's like one of the most surveilled major city in the entire world, or something like that. But okay, whatever. It's just TV. And I did like that they kind of had a little moment for Sarah where I can't remember who addressed her like, "Hey, were you tempted to sort of warn your younger self not to get on the Queen's Gambit?" And Sarah's like, "Yeah, I was." It was also kind of fun watching Sarah and young Heatwave sort of bounce off of each other, and older Sarah would say to Heatwave after he tried to hit on her like, "She's not your type. You're not her type." Just kind of foreshadowing where things are going to be going in terms of Sarah's sexuality a little bit there. Now, speaking of Heatwave, man, he really had some great stuff this episode. I mean, his younger self is clearly tormented by, running away and causing the death of his parents. His older self is just like, you know what? I've had a lot of time to think about what I did back then and my life since then, and even says, make better choices than I did. Of course, there's going to be the amnesia pills and all this, so clearly that's not going to happen. But still, it does kind of give Heatwave and his younger self a little moment to kind of come to terms with it. So even though young Heatwave might not remember it, he at least kind of may have found inside a little piece. An older Heatwave, again, kind of got to say to himself what his younger self really needed to hear. And that's a very powerful thing. I mean, who among us hasn't wished, like, man, I wish I could go back and, you know, tell my younger self some of the things that I've learned in my life since then. I mean, it's certainly I'd certainly take that opportunity to go back to and sort of lay a few hard truths on my younger self if I had the opportunity. Tell him not to waste some opportunities that, in looking back, perhaps I did not take real advantage of. But c'est la vie, yeah. Uh, let's see. Of course, we need to talk about Jax and his dad. I mean, that was really cool stuff. Him, Mark Stein arranging for him to have that moment where he could at least kind of speak to his father and see that, yeah, his father was incredibly proud of him, even though all he'd done at that point was be born, and that was really, you know, kind of on his mom and the doctors and such. But still, at least Jax got to walk away from that, like, having had a moment with his dad, having seen a little bit of the man that he was, and being able to see with his own eyes his father's love for him, which is more than he ever had before. And then, of course, there's that whole situation where Pilgrim kidnaps him, and Jax comes in there and helps save him, and even says, like, Dad, on this day and in this place, totally be safe. And, it's that kind of moment sort of struck me a little bit. Where Jack says, like, hey, on this day when you're in this place, watch out for IEDs. I mean, my stepsister is married to a guy who used to be career Army, and he had at least one close call with an IED in Iraq. So just thinking about where my nieces and nephews could have gone with their lives if he'd been a little less lucky, it's certainly impossible to fault Jax for that. Now, whether or not this is going to have any real effect on the future, I'm going to think probably not. But still, it is a, a powerfully human moment, especially if you have anybody in your life who was taken, in an accident or through in warfare or through something that really genuinely could have been prevented if things had just taken a slightly different twist. Also, this episode, we get to see this lady who's called the Caretaker, and they kind of explain, this is that the Time Masters sort of plucked children from various points in history that would have had no real impact on the timeline and raised them to be Time Masters. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of that famous French science fiction series, Valerian, where he ends up with, as a companion, this young woman from medieval France. Um, I don't want to get into it because that's complicated stuff, but not super widely available in English. But do check it out if you can, because Valerian is actually some pretty cool stuff. And if you're familiar with the lore of it, there's a pretty good chance it was more than a little influential on Star Wars. Okay, so I've been going at this for about 20 minutes, which I think is a good amount of time. So, yeah, all in all, a really nice episode. The idea of the team just saying, like, okay, now we're going to have to go and fight Vandal Savage at the height of his power. Hmm, that's some good stuff. So I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.